Transformers, transform their backs in the sky. And I transform my brothers. We won't stand for defeat.
Well, I hope I'm a man enough to handle you guys for 30
Well, this is it. So I don't know if you remember us from last time.
I remember.
Okay, because we're the Transformers nerds.
I know.
We're
Trust me, I remember. It's
Yeah.
unforgettable.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Well, we were really excited to come back, and then they offered us the opportunity to come and talk to you again.
Great.
So we kind of wanted to build on what we spoke about last time, really, if that's okay. So,
Great.
We
I probably don't remember what I talked
No,
about.
I was going to say,
but I'll be happy to go right with you.
Yeah, that's cool. We're in the know. And we felt a bit privileged because, of course, a lot of the folks that are here today are like sort of professional media people, if you will, which I'm not saying we're not, but we're
definitely not.
we're more like your hardcore.
Which is good,
you know,
especially for this movie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was the thing. And I guess to start with, I wanted to ask you about, now that the film is out, essentially, you know, what your reaction is to some of the positive reception that it's had, and you know how you're feeling about all of that.
It's better than the alternative for sure.
Yeah.
But what's really gratifying about the feedback is that the fans have so many times said, "This is the film we've been waiting for."
Yeah.
That's unbelievably good to you know, because especially having lived with this franchise as long as I have, I know how much it means to people.
Yeah.
You know, and so when you hear that, you really did something right.
Yes. Well, I guess that was interesting because, of course, the franchise has always been popular. You know, it's always done well at the box office, that kind of stuff. But this one really seems to have resonated with...
Except for the first animated movie, which did not do well.
Well, yeah. I wasn't counting that one. I suppose, you know,
good, because I'm not part of that one.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about like the Lorenzo films, if you will. But yeah, it's interesting because everyone we've spoken to, you know, people that have been fans of this franchise since the beginning, a lot of them are calling this the best Transformers film of all. So I don't know.
It's nice to hear. I mean, look, it's hard to choose between your kids.
Yeah.
It is definitely satisfying. It's definitely different. I think the thing that I'm most satisfied is that we have transformed your understanding of Optimus and Megatron.
Sure.
And I think that's pretty amazing when you think about it. It's 40 years people have had relationships with those two characters, and I don't think you can look at them the same after this movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's quite a fresh spin on something that actually has been, you know, characters that have been around for 40 years.
Yeah, it gives them more dimension.
Yeah, it's a completely new dynamic because we're so used to Megatron and Optimus and that. But this, and when you first see it, it just feels natural as well. It doesn't feel like you're looking at something and sometimes you'll be like, oh, this is wrong, this is different. You just watch it and go, this is perfect. This is a brand new take on these characters.
Yeah, look, obviously, it's never been done in the lore exactly how we did it, but we took pieces from different, as you guys know, you know the lores. There's so many different things to reach from.
This is it. I was actually interested in that, in how that came about, like which, you know, what was the decision around which bits of lore to pick? I mean, the one thing, for example, is like the whole thing around the 13 primes that is in there.
Yeah.
Like, was that, you know, I suppose, what was that process in terms of cherry picking all of those influences?
Well, it really started with the idea of Optimus as the librarian, that particular, you know, that part of the lore, that he was a guy who believed in change from within, and Megatron didn't believe that was possible. That was sort of the driving influence in terms of how to set up the rest of the story in a way. It had to fit that, you know, and what we didn't have time to do in a movie like this is, you know, see him get frustrated with the powers that be and all that, you know, so painting them as outsiders that have a perspective was really helpful.
Yeah, because there have been attempts before in some of the comics and things to have, you know, Megatron and the Decepticons more as kind of the working class, if you like, and then, you know, Optimus and the good guys actually sort of weirdly...
Elite.
The sort of authority, as it were. Yeah. Whereas this sort of does a fresh spin on that. They're both the working class.
Yeah,
they're both, you know, downtrodden.
One, we wanted to have them in the same place so that as they transitioned, it wouldn't be a fight over you're elite and you're not, or whatever those things were. But I think even more specifically, I'm bored with it's kind of a sci-fi convention that the elite are there and the poor downtrodden are down there, you know? And so even though you can see in the movie that the people who can transform are the elite, but they're not the rich exactly, right?
Sure.
They're so it's a different dynamic, but I think having them you had to have them be in sort of the same place to be driven by Optimus's or Orion's dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's sort of what it feels like. It feels like Megatron isn't evil, but he feels like he's almost pushed there from Orion's constant nudging. It feels more like a breakup movie than, two people fighting.
Yeah.
That's such the core of this movie, which is a really interesting take for Transformers. Even in the 1986 movie, there's a lot of just fighting. Whereas this, it's really those two characters' personalities and their relationship, and that everything builds from there. Like, for you, that must be just amazing to see that finally come out in a movie like this, and then get the reaction it has.
Creatively, it was really exciting to explore because you had more opportunity to do more emotion, more humor. A lot of things came out of that, you know. And I think more than anything, one of the interesting things that have changed as we were working on the story was Megatron's turn, or I say D16's turn.
Yeah.
Was very tricky because at first it was too early. Then it was like, why? And then okay, so, and funny enough, so then we were like, okay, we got to really make the audience related. Then the audience started relating to Megatron more than Optimus. We're like, no, that's not what we're going to do here. And we came up with the idea of the idolization of Sentinel. And that's really what helped all of us, but especially the audience, understand the level of betrayal, that kind of betrayal does things to you.
Yeah, almost that third force, as it were, kind of that external factor.
Orion gets him out into the world, and he wouldn't have had that journey without him. But Sentinel is the one that turns him sour, I'll say.
It breaks his heart, doesn't it? Kind of, it's that don't meet your heroes when he finally meets him and it crushes everything, which is so different to before, because normally Megatron portrayed as a bully. Yeah. And in this case, he's not. He's
not at all.
Generally quite an upstanding guy. And he's quite happy with his life. Not happy, but content to a point. And then he's pushed and pushed, and then he sees his dream sort of crash down, and he snaps. And
society pushed him. In a way, it betrayed his belief, and that goes into his belief eventually in authoritarianism is that, forget it, I'm not following the rules, That's better to have one person who's right, determine things, and it's a very modern character in that way, I think, because a lot of people feel betrayed by the systems that they're in.
It's definitely a film that, is striking at the right time in that regard, kind of in the wider culture and things like that. I mean, I'm interested, was there, because when we first saw the initial trailers, that kind of stuff, it wasn't really, I think, clear how much this film would get to the breakup, if you like. And one thing I was curious about to start with, and obviously we now know, were you going to go the whole hog, or were you going to show a little bit of it? Was that ever a conversation to maybe stretch the story out over more parts, or was it always the plan to kind of have it done?
This was the plan, this story. There's more story to be told, for sure, and we have some ideas about that. But no, it's one of the, I'll say, curses of having such a strong and passionate fan base is there was a lot of negativity towards the first trailer.
We were talking about that.
There was. No, there was, and it was interesting to us because our decision in putting that out was very specific, was to set a tone that you're not expecting.
Yes.
But it was interesting because, and like anything, when you put it out in the world, you don't know what the response is going to be. But a lot of people took it as we weren't going to go to an action place, And it's like, whoa, wait a second. No. And also, pragmatically, funny enough, animation is a lot like live action, which is the action scenes take the longest to do. So we didn't have a lot of action scenes done at that point.
Yeah. I mean, that is interesting to hear you say that, because certainly we saw a lot of that as well. I mean, I will say I really liked the first trailer, and I was quite positive about what it was showing. But I did speak to a lot of people that were like, oh, it looks like a kids animated film with a lot of humor, and that it feels like it's going to have that kind of element over the action, as you say. I mean, if you were to go back and do it again, would you change how that was promoted, or do you think it landed well because of that in a way?
It's a good question. I tend not to look back on something like that. I mean, I will say differently. If we get to make another one of these, we'll analyze that choice in the next one, right?
Yeah.
But look, I like what happened because what we were really trying to signal is these are different Transformers than you wanted.
Yeah.
than you're used to. And I think that's a pretty good message to send to an audience on the 8th movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
You
I mean,
know?
it certainly created conversation.
Yeah.
So I think in that regard,
Yeah.
probably.
Well,
it
maybe
worked,
there's
you
no
know?
such thing as bad press.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But
It definitely created a lot of
it
reaction.
also made me laugh.
Yeah.
And when we first saw that scene, we were like, "Oh my God, they are so approachable as characters."
Yeah.
And I think that's why we took that step forward.
Was it quite freeing for you, because this is the first one that's animated? Was it quite freeing to be able to do that with these characters rather than having to have humans because it's real and having to have real cars and things? This you could focus in, because it's very interesting. Like watching this film, it feels very personal, even though you've got these massive landscapes, but the camera always focuses in on the character moments.
Yeah.
It seems really purposeful on that front. So,
No, it was great to have really less elements, right? And for the focal point to be the relationship, you know. Usually the focal point is, can we survive? What's going to happen? You know. And there's a lot of elements to that, right? Who are the bad guys? Who are the good guys who are going to save the day? You have cars, you have all those sort of, but more than anything, the reason we were attracted to this story was the driver of this story is the relationship between these two guys and the loss of it.
That makes a lot of sense, because a lot of films, like the Transformers films, like every film is like, this is the worst day that's ever happened and the biggest fight they've ever had to face, and it just keeps escalating. But this film, it's very much like it's just a battle between them on a personal level and the friendship breaking up.
Well, I remember when I first ran into the story, it's very biblical. It's not exactly Cain and Abel, but it has elements of that where you're just going, this is really emotionally significant, you know, it's tearing at you. We didn't want to lose that along the way, but we also wanted the levity and the fun of going on this journey, and it felt to us in making an animated movie, we owed both the family audience and our core audience an experience that spoke to both of them.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, one question I had was whether it was, I presume, a conscious decision to kind of go for that slightly more younger audience as well, in a way that this film can, you know, appeal to both, because a lot of the live action films maybe skew a little bit more kind of 12 plus or whatever it is, but this one feels like maybe it'll bring in, you know, slightly younger.
You know, it's an interesting thing because the story of how Orion Pax and D16 evolve drives it younger, because they're younger characters.
That's true.
You know, and so it was never like, oh, okay, how are we going to get the young audience? How are we going to get? As it evolves, you start asking some more sophisticated questions. But the first question we were asking is like, what's the journey of these characters? And they, you know, in particular, both of them they're sort of starry-eyed characters, right?
Yeah.
D16 is starry-eyed about Sentinel, and Ryan Pax is starry-eyed about just about everything, right? You know,
sure.
and so that does bring it younger, or a younger character. And actually, in some of the earlier scripts, it felt too young. And so trying to find the sweet spot of that journey emotionally of like, they're not teenagers, they're young 20s. They're trying to become young men to men.
Yeah.
You know, and so, I mean, somebody said to me the other day, this is Stand By Me on Cybertron.
That's a great
And I thought so too. And we'd never thought about that, but it was like, okay, I'll take that.
That's one of the great things about Stand By Me and this movie is it doesn't talk down to the audience.
No.
Like a lot of kids' films play very much to a smaller, younger audience. This doesn't. It's like a kind of film you can enjoy. Like a lot like Stand By Me is one you can enjoy as an adult and as a child. And with this, seeing Optimus have this kind of more youthful sort of attitude, it's really refreshing to see. It's like, for yourself, it must be really like exciting to be able to, having dealt with these characters for so many years, be able to add something different, because he's always portrayed in every media as old and weary and tired.
Battle scarred.
Yeah, and even you see,
and also, he's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
In this movie, he's not right.
He's not right. Yeah.
He's almost like,
maybe at the very end.
he's not a villain, but he's almost the antagonizing force that's pushing Megatron into his.
Well, it's interesting you see it that way. I'm not sure I see it the same way, but in the sense that I see the betrayal of Sentinel's betrayal is the thing that really pushes him over the edge. I'll say it that way, right? Orion pushes him, I guess, in a way to open his mind, and then once his mind's open, Sentinel gives him a good whack on the side of his head. It's what's so interesting is, and I think this is really a cool thing, is you guys grew up with one version of Optimus and Megatron. You can't think of them the same way after seeing these.
No, it's true. I mean, I think that's one of the strengths of Transformers, and it's what I always say about the brand, is that actually, I mean, even going back to the 80s, there was a cartoon and a comic, for example, the two storylines. And the fact that it has been reinvented multiple times over sort of lends itself to having those, fresh perspectives, that kind of stuff. But even then, it's surprising that we've got to this point and this is still a new thing.
It is, and it's interesting to me because I think the other side of it is, if this is your first movie of Transformers, you're going to see those two characters differently than you guys see them, right? Like, they're going to see them just differently. And what does that mean going forward?
Exactly. It's a bit like the kids that grew up before the prequels, the Star Wars prequels versus afterwards. You get that different perspective on Darth Vader.
I can only appreciate, for me, I'm the early one.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I was the same. Yeah, exactly. So it is different. And where do you see this all going now? Because, of course, I think last time we briefly touched on the idea of a sequel. I'm sure things have maybe evolved a little bit since then.
Well, I'm a little bit... I try not to get ahead of ourselves, and I think one of the reasons why we've been able to keep our series fresh is because we wait until we actually get to experience these movies with the audience before we settle on what we're going to do next. And there are definite lessons about what people responded to here. For instance, the reception to Starscream here. There's no way we don't make him a big character. Character. You know what I mean? It's just really funny how you can feel it right away. And I think what's great is, and this goes to as an adult, a relationship doesn't end. The bitterness either grows, or you try to repair it, or you try to do that. So there's a lot of stuff left between Optimus and Megatron to explore.
I wondered that actually, if you would go, and again, I'm sure you can't say exactly, but if you would go kind of the more linear route of like, okay, they're enemies now, or if actually there's still more.
There's more
to mine.
There's much more to mine, and I think if we go all the way to just they're forever enemies and they just can't get their act together in any way or form, then you only have room from a story point of view for probably one more movie. Whereas if you stay in the relationship and let the relationship dynamic drive the movie, there's 2 or 3 movies then immediately because there's a lot of richness.
That's interesting.
Because you see the quintessons in this movie, for example, and when you first see them, you feel like, oh, those are going to be the main villains. But then obviously it turns out to be Sentinel. Yeah. So this sort of feels like for a sequel, or a later sequel, where they would then come back and their conflict continues with Optimus and Megatron.
Were those naughty quintessons are coming back. Trust me on that. Yeah, no, I think we haven't seen the true might of the quintessons either. We saw the queen bee, if you would. And you could see the viciousness of those characters. But, now what happens when nobody wants to mine? Yeah. Now what? Yeah. So that's the part we're going to explore for sure from a story point of view, and that's not going to make the quintessons happy.
That's a good point, actually, because we've got all these characters now who are suddenly free to make their own choices, whereas they've had this sort of strict regime previously.
Yeah, and I also think that there's several things in there. It's, Fishburne, when he says, it's not the cog that makes you, it's the spark. That tells you that it's a more resilient, it's not about just power, if you would. It's about heart. It's about those sort of things. And I think that's going to be a chance for us to explore as the quintessons get more angry. We'll see how we rise to the occasion.
Interesting. And in terms of potential future of this series, would you see yourself like drawing on other areas of Transformers as well? Because in this one, for example, there's influences from like Transformers Prime, quite clearly, different cartoons from the past. Are there any particular parts of Transformers lore that you would be interested to kind of bring to the table for the future? Or?
Well, the answer is yes, but we don't have that sorted. Yeah. you know, as we begin to just try to build the next movie, that's when we start getting into, all right, well, what, not how to manipulate the lore, but what lore fits here.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where the trick really lies in, is trusting the lore and not being entirely doctrinaire at the same time, you know. And, you know, every time we're not entirely doctrinaire, there's a few fans out there like, wait a second, you know. But I believe storytelling needs to evolve forward. And if you do exactly what has been, I don't know what the excitement is about.
I completely
you know?
agree.
It's like, I always say surprise is the best element of entertainment.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing it literally the same, I remember in the first movie, people, before they saw the movie, were like, Michael Bay is ruining my childhood. Right? I mean, it was real. And by the way, it freaked us out. We're like, holy, what?
I'm not, I can imagine.
You know, and then they come to love the robots in the configuration that came by and large. Thank God. But that's exactly it, is you have to have the guts, or I'll say the sort of philosophy, which I have, which is, no, they're not going to be happy if they look like a 1980s animated cartoon.
Right. No. Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
Yeah.
Seriously?
We've seen it already.
You've seen it, and also it's going to feel old and creaky.
Yeah.
No matter what you do.
It's so true.
You know?
I mean, it's fascinating because you're right, and there always will be fans that are stuck in one particular part of this 40-year franchise, but it also does need to evolve and change in order to.
If it doesn't, if it doesn't stay up with, I'll say, cinema technique, then it starts feeling like, when did you make that movie? I mean, there's a movie or two recently, I won't name them, but I was looking at them, I said, well, those feel like movies that were made in the early 60s. Like, what?
Right.
What is the tone that they're trying to do? So I think that's where it gets hard, and that's also where the excitement can land for us in trying to create something.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
The 2007 movie, when that came out, like you say, at first people looked at it and went, oh, it's like that. But when they saw it, like, I remember viscerally being in the cinema being like, whoa, watching
there was a
having
feeling
it transform for the very first time.
Never seen anything like it.
And that's what you need in cinema and any kind of franchise for longevity. It has to change as something new. It might put old people off, but it brings new people in.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't have like this film or any of the things we like about Transformers without that 2007 movie. And for you as a filmmaker, then, how do you feel like this and that? Because this feels like a similar kind of like really exciting refresh of the whole brand again, like the 2007 film did. Yeah,
no, they both have a similar feeling in terms of like, but for me, it goes to the, you know, the first movie we reduced it to boy gets car gets girl.
Yes, yeah.
And that the success of that simple thing, and this is two best friends who become mortal enemies.
Right.
Like when you can describe a movie in a sentence or two, I think you're really on strong ground, because that means you're not like, you don't have to explain some, you know, and then they had to travel through space, and then
that makes sense.
So
I saw it described as bros become foes, which I thought that really made me chuckle. Yeah.
Exactly, there was definitely that one too, and which made us all chuckles. But what's so interesting about that is you could say that's really simplistic. Yes. And that's why it has a lot of resonance, because you're allowed to build in a way, it's a Christmas tree. Then you're allowed to put a lot of baubles, because that stock is really strong. You don't have to spend a lot of time explaining it.
Yeah.
So you then get to, you know, have a funny Bumblebee character, and you get to have a Alita who's an antagonist, but then becomes part of the team. All the time that allows for.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't have to keep returning to explain the story to the audience, you know.
Yeah.
And it's hard to come up with that all the time. Not just in Transformers. In making film, I think it's the Spielberg once said to me, you know, every movie's about 5 images, and when you actually look at it, whether it's 5 images, but it's about 5 ideas.
Yeah.
And those images usually encapsulate that idea.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess taking that, and you know, I'm aware that we're kind of going to the end, but I was interested to also ask you then about the upcoming G.I. Joe film, which we've seen.
The crossover?
Yeah, exactly. So, I should say yes, the Transformers and G.I. Joe film. And, you know, obviously, the last time we spoke to you as well, you talked a little bit about the sort of, I suppose, the realization for you as a filmmaker that, you know, putting the robots as the priority, if you like, and making them more the characters of the story.
Yeah, well, I think yeah, sorry, keep
No,
going.
no. Well, I was just interested how that works when then you're going to have, presumably a split cast with G.I.
Well,
Joe
it's
characters.
interesting. I think I for myself can't go back. One of the expenses in live action of the robots talking is extraordinary.
Yeah.
So we've always been sort of boxed into really limiting it, and therefore you're almost attaching them to plot then,
Yeah.
right, or action. We have no choice, I believe, and now they have to be very rounded. We have to have robot point of view now.
Yeah.
It has to compete with human point of view in the live action. And that's going to be a really interesting, one of the challenges of the crossover is there's going to be 3 major things to do.
Right.
4. One is, how do these 2 worlds come together?
Yeah.
It's one thing if you're a fan and you've read the comic books or whatever. It's another thing for somebody who doesn't, like, why do those 2 things exist together, right?
Yeah.
So you have to find some commonality that explains why these 2, I'll say, cultures are going to mesh. And then the third thing you're adding is the robots have to be more dynamic characters. Okay, where do you have the time to do that? Because we're not going to make a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
So I think the real challenge is going to be we're going to start out here with we need all these Joes and we need all these Transformers, and then we're going, well, maybe not that many, maybe not that many,
down a
maybe
little,
like
yeah.
here,
Yeah.
which is the process in large respect to almost all large cast movies is, anyone who's done enough of them like I have, you've failed at some point in time.
Yeah.
And you've learned what you did was none of the characters are good enough because you're trying to service too many.
Yeah. That makes a lot of
So
sense.
it's really and of course then you've got Hasbro believes that we have to have these characters, and Paramount believes you have to have these characters, and then, so there's this sort of push and pull, or I should say tear at the fabric of what it is,
A lot of balance to bring to the
Yeah,
whole
so
thing.
what we've got to do is find a way to really bring it in. And so what I don't want people to think in a crossover is you're going to see all the Joe stuff or all the Transformer stuff. You're going to see some of it.
Yeah. The bits that are relevant. I
Yeah,
guess.
like I don't know that we'll go to the pit.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're
Yeah.
not there yet.
Yeah.
But we don't have time for sure in our storytelling to suddenly see, the hierarchy of the Joes, the pit, and then the hierarchy of the.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's.
You have to tell a story, don't you?
This
That's
is
You
it,
got to
yeah.
tell a
relate to
story
and
and try to, center it around 5 or 6 characters. If we can do that, then we'll do a good job.
And forgive me for asking, but do you see it as a continuity, kind of a continuation of Rise of the Beasts and Bumblebee?
There's a really healthy fight going on about that.
Right,
Which
okay.
I don't know the answer about who's going to win.
Okay, interesting.
Up
for debate.
I favor a reboot.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, because there's a lot of good reasons to make it a sequel. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Rise of the Beast was a very entertaining movie and really succeeded. The audience liked it very much. And
Because that was a question with that as well, was that a reboot? And there was almost a similar conversation around Bumblebee.
well,
Like, was that
I've
a
never
reboot?
understood how people saw Bumblebee as a reboot,
Yeah.
because it was so clearly Optimus comes at the end of that movie as though it's the beginning of the Bay world.
Yeah.
And
you
Bumblebee
know.
turns into the car from the old film, from the 2007 film.
Exactly. So I never understood how they saw it, but we did not see it as a reboot. We
Okay.
saw it as a prequel.
Yeah.
And so I think at some time, this isn't a reboot, this movie. This is a new part of the story.
A new story,
That's why I would say I favor a new part of the story as the next movie. It's probably a better way to say it than a reboot.
Okay. So sort of like it's up to interpretation, I guess.
It
almost.
could be. I mean,
Yeah.
again, we're not there yet to declare which direction it's going in.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're out of time from the looks of things, but obviously a big thank you again.
Great.
for-
Great to talk to both of you guys.
Yeah, really
Brilliant.
appreciate it. So, and thank you for continuing to make these
Yeah.
films. So,
Well, hopefully we won't falter on the next one. So,
yeah. Well, we're
And
really,
hopefully everybody shows up to this one. It's,
hopefully, yeah,
This is always the nervous day today.
for sure. I mean, we told you last time, but I've seen it
Adored
again
it.
since and absolutely loved it.
I can't
So-
wait to see it again.
Have you seen it in 3D?
No, but I want to. I'm going to take my son.
I will say to you, I am not a 3D. 3D, I'm fine. You
Yeah.
know, see this movie in 3D, it blows you away.
Okay.
There's something in the chemistry between this. It's unexplainable to all of us, including the 3D people. Something about this.
Interesting.
Suits it.
The marriage between this and 3D was wow.
Just the visuals and everything.
Actually, it's the drama,
Okay.
which that's what caught me off guard,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, fascinating.
So,
That's what you wanted from 3D though, always, isn't it? Is to add to the film, not just be.
well, and I
a
think
thing
the
that pops
problem
out.
with 3D in general is it's been used as a gimmick instead of just as a format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a way,
That's true.
right? And people are like, how wide can we make it? We didn't do that. We
Yeah.
kept it through in a very tight. Having done 3D before, I don't like the accordion thing that people do.
Yeah, sure.
So we kept it in a pretty tight thing. But what's interesting in the drama scenes, you feel the drama more. I can't explain it because all of us were like, whoa. When we first saw the 3D, we're like, what? Cause we were sort of like, oh, you guys want it in 3D? Okay.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, we want it in 3D.
Well, I shall definitely take that
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah,
then, so-
I see if you've had the same reaction. Everybody who's seen it has said to me the same thing.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, I think we're out of time.
Right
But
on.
thank you so much
Yeah,
again.
Pleasure.
Really
It was
appreciate
really
it.
nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Again.